Okay, this will, there, okay. So with that, we'll start. There's, I don't know, hundreds of books written on plant pathology. Each book has their own definition of plant pathology. What I've done, I've tried to distill those definitions into a master gardener definition of plant pathology. And you've got it in your handout there. It's the study of diseases in plants, what causes them, what factors influence their development and spread, and how to prevent or control them. So as master gardeners, we can think in that framework for plant disease, plant problems. I'd like to touch a little bit on the history of plant disease. I think it's very important to give us a sense of the importance of plant pathology. First mention, the first written mention we have of a plant disease is actually found in the Old Testament. They talk about smut on wheat in ancient Babylon. So evidently there is smut in the Bible. 980 BC, prayers were offered in the Temple of Solomon to control plant diseases. Of course, the Romans didn't go to the temples, but they had their own gods, Robigo and Robigus. They had for the rust diseases, and they had a party, Robigelia, celebrated every April the 25th. Rust was a serious issue back then. They hit the wheat and the barley pretty bad, and they tried to grow rye, and they came up with started having this disease called holy fire or St. Anthony's fire. And you see these black structures? Those are actually fungal structures. They're called ergots. Here's a grain of rye here, and these are the ergots where the fungus has come up and overtaken the kernel. These kernels contain some very nasty compounds. LSD was first discovered in these ergots. Ergotamine is there. What ergotamine does, it constricts blood vessels. And this St. Anthony's fire, holy fire, it actually constricted their blood vessels, so they got gangrene in their arms and legs, and their arms and legs fell off. Really nasty disease. Some of you guys might be taking ergotamine today. We use it in medications for migraine headaches. It's used quite a bit. Well, I guess people got tired of their arms and legs falling off, so they went to potatoes in certain areas of Europe. You know where I'm going with this probably. Became the main food source in Ireland, and then the Irish potato famine hit in 1845. In the next 3 years, about 1 million people starved to death. 2 million at least immigrated to the United States. John F. Kennedy's forebears came across. There's an Irish cop on every street corner in New York. There's several towns that are a lot of Irish in Montana mining communities. It influenced our society quite a bit. Some of you may be here because your ancestors came over because of this disease. Great Bengal famine, don't hear too much about this one. During the Second World War, 2 million people starved to death in 1 year. It was a disease that attacked the rice crop. The American chestnut, very valuable timber tree. It was the climax tree in the Appalachians. A fungus coming in from China. Endothea parasitica came in and in 30 years killed all the American chestnut trees. Coffee, very popular in the 1600s, but in the 1800s, the rust disease came and destroyed the coffee plants. This is when Great Britain, their sun never set on their empire. They looked for things to grow in Ceylon, where they had most of their coffee growing, and they found that tea grew very well there. So you go to the store now and you can buy Ceylon tea. And you go into England now, and at 4 o'clock you don't have coffee time, you have tea time. So it's influenced their society, the disease. White pine blister rust, another rust disease, serious rust disease. We still have a timber industry in Idaho, a lot of white pine in Idaho, and this rust is causing serious issues with the forest up there. 1920s, that same rust that the Romans had their Robigo and Robigus for came and hit the crop in North America and Canada, caused serious issues. We're looking at having another epidemic of that showing up. There's an isolate called UG99 that this rust mutated, and 80% of the crop of the world's grain crops are susceptible to that rust disease. And we found resistance, and we're trying to breed it into the crops so we don't have that issue of having problems with the grain crops. But hopefully we can get it bred in and distributed before that rest gets out of hand. It's jumped from Ethiopia into Iran and Iraq, and other diseases jumped there. They jumped to India, and then they jump across the Pacific to us. And so it has gone into Iran and Iraq, so we're watching it pretty closely. Dutch elm disease showed up in the early 1930s, showed up in Utah. Sherm Thompson, I was getting my degree at the time, and he got a call, and there were some American elms that were sick, so he and I came down in 1984 and discovered it in Kaysville in Utah for the first time. So it's pretty much in all 50 states now. 1970, southern corn leaf blight showed up. By this time, we were breeding resistance into the crops, but we only had what's called single gene resistance, and so there was only one gene in the crop that was keeping the fungus from attacking the corn. The fungus mutated and started attacking the corn in late 1969. There was a plant pathologist working on this disease, and so he invested heavily in corn futures in 1970, knowing this disease would wipe out the corn crop, and sure enough it did, and he made lots of money. I'm hoping to find mine real soon here. Citrus canker showed up in 1984. This sticks in my mind. I remember on the news bulldozers bulldozing out all these citrus groves because they had the citrus canker. Millions of trees were destroyed because of that particular problem. 1980s again in the Appalachians, dogwood anthracnose. We'll talk about anthracnose. It's causing issues still in the dogwoods there. And then sudden oak death. Has anyone heard of that one? It's been in the news lately. It's a fungal disease that lives in the soil. It's in the same genus as the fungus that caused the late blight epidemic, the Phytophthora infestans. This is also a Phytophthora that lives in the soil. It attacks oaks and several other types of trees, and it can attack redwoods, and they're concerned that it'll get into the redwood forests in California and cause damage. So that's if you don't have anything to worry about, you can worry about the rust disease and the Phytophthora diseases tonight. Okay, that's a brief history. Fascinating, if you get into the plant history, the witch, Salem, Massachusetts, the witch trials and so forth, they feel a lot of that is attributed to those ergots because of the LSD in the ergot and the women hallucinating and that's being considered witches and stuff. Okay, we'll get into the meat now. This is a take-home message. When diseases become established, often the only thing the master gardener can do is tell the gardeners the color of the train that ran over them. Okay? So prevention, when you're talking disease, prevention is very important. When a plant gets diseased, I don't know, when gardeners get a problem in their plant, like a tomato plant, it's not looking too good, so, it needs more water. They'll put more water on it, and then it's still not doing well, so we got too much water, they'll dry it out. It's not, put a little fertilizer on it. By the time they bring it into the clinic, the plant's almost dead. So, if you're manning the clinic or something, all you can tell them, well, next year you need to do this. You're pretty much the mortician at that point. But if you're a grower, you see something wrong, and if your livelihood depends on it, you're right on it, because you understand when it comes to diseases, you've got to be right on top of it. That late blight that caused the potato famine, Monday morning, if a farmer wakes up and sees late blight and he does nothing about it, 10 days later, his entire field is dead. It moves that fast. Incredible disease. So a lot of diseases don't move that fast, but some do. So when you're talking disease, it's important. Insects, if you got a few potato bugs eating your potato plant, you notice it Monday. If you don't get to it till Friday, yeah, they've eaten a few leaves, but you move them off and the potato plant will come back and you'll still get potatoes. If it's that late blight, it's gone. It's too late. So talking disease, you got to get right on it to make sure you understand what the problem is and get it taken care of if you can. Okay, you need 3 things to have a disease. What 3 things do you need? A host. What else? A pathogen. And the environment. Yep, host, pathogen, and environment. Of course, the host has to be susceptible, and that depends on a lot of different things. Pathogen, it's got to be of a virulent race. In other words, the pathogen has to be able to cause disease. A lot of fungi are the same, like I don't know, Fusarium solani. That can cause disease, but there's a lot of Fusarium solani that won't cause disease. So it has to be a virulent strain or race of it. And it's got to be present in sufficient numbers. Let's say I made egg salad, okay? And I was just sitting down to eat, and my daughter calls, and she's got a flat tire. So I go out the door and fix her flat and come back in an hour later, and there's my egg salad sitting on the counter. I forgot to put it in the fridge. Am I going to eat it? I'm a bachelor. I'm going to eat it, okay? but what are my chances of getting sick? It depends on how warm it is. But, an hour, yeah, it's going to multiply. But let's change the scenario and say my daughter's axle broke. And it took me 5 hours. And then I come back and it's sitting on the counter. Would I eat it then? No. Not even me. I wouldn't eat it. Okay, what's the difference? Time and temperature. And what's going on inside that egg salad? What's growing? The bacteria are growing, aren't they? So in an hour, yeah, I'm going to get a few. But, if I eat it, the chance of me getting sick are, in my mind, are slim. So I'd chance it. Same thing with plant pathogens. If you got a few spores floating around, chances of getting a disease are fairly slim. But you have them in sufficient numbers, yeah, you got to worry. So, if you got a spot where there's a disease developing, get rid of that. Get rid of the inoculum. And then the wind vector. A vector is something that moves something from one place to another. If this is a virus, say, a vector would come and pick that virus up and move it and take it over here. So that I just vectored this virus, okay? So a vector moves it. And the environment, we have one environment we're dealing with in this room, right? We're all in here in this room. If there was a plant in here, it'd have two environments, right? The atmosphere and the soil. It's got a completely different atmosphere in that soil. It's important, environment rather in the soil. Very important to keep that in mind. It's got two environments to deal with, whereas we're just dealing with the air. And sometimes we don't think soil. Yet a lot of things go on there. So environment, you can make a list just as well as I can of things that go into the environment. But anyway, those three things, when they come together in those proper proportions, you end up with the disease triangle. And there it is. You had the soils triangle, right? This is a lot easier triangle, right? This is a funner triangle, I think. But soil triangle is very important. Don't get me wrong. But this is, you've already got this memorized. Do you guys have quizzes? If you ever have a quiz about plant pathology, this will be on it, okay? But you've already got it memorized, so. But let's say the average homeowner walks out the door and they see a bunch of fungus growing on their grass. What's the average homeowner going to do? Oh, probably nothing. But let's say they don't want that fungus there. So what are they going to? They're going to go to the store and buy what? A fungicide to spray, right? Is that wrong? Well, no. That's a good way to control it. But what other options does the average homeowner have? Do you think? They don't have the knowledge. You guys that are into plants, you probably have a couple other ideas. But if you use this as a tool, you will have 12 to 15 ideas right off the top of your head, okay? In the next 10 minutes, we're going to learn those, okay? And you're going to teach me. So how we're going to use this as a tool, since I'm the teacher, I get to do this. You cannot change the pathogen and you cannot change the environment. The only thing you can change is the host. Now remember, you take any one of these three things away and you won't have a disease, So let's say we can manipulate the host somehow so we don't have a disease. Tell me how you're going to fix the problem.
Overseed the lawn? Overseed the lawn.
Okay, overseed it with what?
High resistant variety.
Okay, resistant variety. There you go. That's the easiest way to fix a problem. Plant a resistant variety if you can find it. That's the easiest way to go. So there's one thing we can do to change the host. What else? Remove it. Absolutely. There's another thing you can do. Put a petunia there instead of your grass. That'll work. What else?
Can you water less? Does that help with the
Yes. We could take a whole 3 hours on this. That's sort of an interaction between the environment and the host. And absolutely you can do that. But if you water less, what are you doing to the host? Pardon? Say that again?
You're weakening your host.
Okay, so if you weaken your host, are you going to have more disease problem? You will. So how do you reverse that? You make your host healthier. Okay, there's another thing you can do. Keep your host healthier. So there's three things right there. Keep your host healthy, remove it, plant a resistant variety. And there's several others, and we won't take the time to go into them. Okay, I'm not going to let you change the host. I'm not going to let you change the environment, but you can change the pathogen somehow. So how are we going to fix the problem if we change the pathogen?
Spray for it.
So, okay, here we go. We got the fungicide we can spray, or an insecticide to kill the insects that got the aphids or the viruses or whatever. So we can spray, use a chemical approach. What else?
Remove it.
Okay, prune out the dead stuff, remove the pathogen. If it's a small garden spot, you might have to remove the soil if it's in the soil. Of course, a large garden spot, that won't work, but a small garden spot, you can remove the soil even. But prune out the dead stuff, yeah. Anything else we can do on the pathogen side?
Like change how you water it, change how...
Okay, you can, but again, that's an interaction between the pathogen and environment, but absolutely you can do that.
Starve it from what it needs. Like if it needs water, keep it dry. The pathogen.
Yeah, okay, manage the pathogen through the environment, absolutely.
There's a biological control.
There's another one, biological controls. There are biological controls sometimes that can take care of the pathogen. So there's 3 or 4 on the pathogen side. Okay, I'm not going to let you change the host or the pathogen, but I'm going to let you change the environment. So how are we going to control that disease if we change the environment? What do fungi like? Warm, moist. Okay, with that in mind, how are you going to change the environment?
Manipulate how you water it.
Okay.
Rather than watering it in such a way that it overwaters, or I guess this would go for funguses and whatnot. Keep it off the leaves and things like that.
Yeah,
So,
very good.
Drip system or whatever.
Yeah, most of your spores require at least 4 hours of free moisture to germinate. Some take up to 48 hours, even more. So with that in mind, we have dew. Let's say you have a dew period between 4 and 7. If you turn your sprinklers on at 7 o'clock to 9, what have you done? You've increased that wetting surface from 3 hours to 5 hours. So if the spore takes 4 hours to germinate, well, you've just given it that window to germinate and cause issues. Fortunately, in the West, we're dry and we don't have a lot of fungal problems, but we can have them and we bring them on ourselves generally. Okay, what else can we do to the environment? Change our irrigation practices.
Plant it in the proper place.
Okay, plant it in the proper place. Make sure the environment that you're putting the plant in is, and that's sort of an interaction, but mostly environment to keep it healthy. What else?
Fertilize.
Okay, fertilize. You want to change that, and again, that's sort of an interaction to keep it healthy, but you've got that environment in the soil that you got to concentrate on. Aerate the soil, more organic matter, a lot of different things you can do in the environmental area. So enough discussion on that, but you see now when you go out in your garden and your tomatoes diseased, or you got a disease in your tree, or your petunia's sick, if you think of this triangle, all of a sudden, how many ideas do you have to fix the problem? Well, I can work on the host, I can work on the pathogen, I can work on the environment. So very, very effective tool, very simple, okay? So keep that in mind when you come across disease issues. Any questions on that? Okay, diseases, we have biotic agents and abiotic agents that cause disease. A disease can be categorized as something that causes abnormal growth in the plant. We as plant pathologists like to claim a whole bunch of stuff on that area, but an abiotic agent, that's generally the environment that causes unnatural growth in the plant, if you will, and there's also a whole bunch of things. Nutrient deficiencies and excesses. I don't know what it is about human nature, but you know, if a little's good, more's better, right? And I don't know. That's, they put more fertilizer on and kill their lawn because they fertilize it too much or put too much spray on. Nutrient deficiency and excesses, they cause a lot of abiotic problems in plants. What's the number one cause of houseplant death?
Overwatering.
Overwatering. And number 2? Underwatering, yep. So same issues outside. Mechanical damage, weed whacker blight, lawnmower blight, tricycle blight, car blight, all sorts of mechanical damage. Insect damage, I put that up there it's caused by a biotic agent, but the damage they cause, sometimes what they cause, it looks like a disease, only it's not, and we'll talk about that. Air pollution, you know, we don't worry about that in Idaho because our air is exchanged about every 0.5 seconds. It's always blowing up there. But down here, you've got the inversions. Like I say, I was born and raised in Logan, so I'm very familiar with your inversions. When I was in university, we'd go down to the fields and we could see air pollution problems even back in the 80s. It's a fact. Air pollution is an issue with plants in these valleys. Soil problems, we've already talked about those. Chemical damage, oversprays and too much chemical and things like that. Or I'm sure everybody's parked their lawnmower on the grass and filled the gas tank and it overflowed and got a little spot on the lawn for a while. These are chemical type damages, and there's several others that go in the abiotic area of diseases, okay? Okay, let's talk biotic agents. These are agents that are living that cause disease in plants, okay? And we just have 7 in our area that have issues. We have issues with. One, fungi. You know what fungi are? It's the green stuff on your bread and on your cheese and so forth. Bacteria, you're familiar with that. Are you familiar with phytoplasms? Pardon? A what? Oh, I didn't hear that.
I was asking if it was a sunburn.
Oh, a sunburn. Oh, no. Good thought, though. Good thought, though. Phyto means plant. So phytopathology is plant pathology. Who's into science fiction here? Anybody know what a shapeshifter is? Okay. These phytoplasms are shapeshifters. They're about the size of bacteria, but they don't have a cell wall. It wasn't until the 1970s we discovered that they caused plant diseases. What we would do, we'd grind up the tissue that was diseased, and we'd put it in a filter, and the filter was so small the bacteria couldn't get through, but the viruses could. And so we'd put a vacuum on it, and then we'd take the stuff from the top, stuff from the bottom, and put them in plants. The stuff from the top caused the disease. Well, it was bacterial because it didn't go through the filter. If the stuff on the bottom caused the disease, well, it had to be viral because those pores were so small, nothing else could get through. Well, we didn't know about these phytoplasms. They didn't have a cell wall, but they were shapeshifters, and they'd just squeeze down through those pores and then squeeze out the bottom. And so finally, in the mid-1970s, there's a story, we won't have time to go into it, but we discovered those. Then we have the viruses and viroids. Anybody familiar with a viroid? Somebody said, is it something like a hemorrhoid? No, it's not anything like a hemorrhoid. But it's a piece of RNA, a very, very, very small piece of RNA, and we'll talk about it. Just incredibly small. Nematodes, are you familiar with nematodes? They're little roundworms in the soil. We'll talk about those. And then parasitic plants. We have 2 in our area that we have to worry about. These are the biotic agents that cause problems. Okay. Who's scrubbed a potato and got that black stuff you can't scrub off? Anybody know what that is? No, it's not dirt. That's actually a plant disease. It's a plant fungus. It's called Rhizoctonia solani. I don't think it'll be on the quiz, but and that's how it lives. That's how it overwinters. It melanizes and it lives on the tuber like that. It'll also live in dead organic matter in the soil. That's one of the ways it survives. These a lot of different mechanisms these organisms have to survive over the winter. Resting spores, those ergots I talked about, that's how they overwinter.
Does it hurt the potato?
Does it hurt the potato? In this particular phase, not really unless you're trying to sell them. A lot of that's on, people don't like to buy them. If you plant it, yes, that can infect the stolons. And in fact, there was a study done where if you manipulate this disease just right, you can increase your bottom line by having this disease cut the smaller potatoes off and leaving the larger potatoes, so you get more potatoes larger and you get more dollar value for the larger potatoes. So if you do it just perfect with the irrigation and so forth, again, controlling that environment of the disease triangle, you can actually increase your not increase your yield, but increase your bottom line because you get larger potatoes because you cut the small ones off. So, but that's.
So can you eat the potato like that?
Yes.
Can you not eat?
Yeah, we eat fungus. Don't we eat fungus? Mushrooms and stuff? Yeah, and nobody's ever died from eating this to my knowledge, so don't worry about it. But All sorts of ways. Insects will overwinter as adults, and they'll have viruses in them. Perennial weeds, they host the nematodes, they'll host viruses, fungi, bacteria. A lot of different ways they overwinter. That late blight organism that's so serious it can kill a potato field in 10 days completely, that actually has to have living tissue to survive. So you say, well, how many potato plants are growing in Idaho right now? You know, we still have snow up there. Not very many, right? So how does that fungus survive? Oh. The dog didn't survive, but the fungus does. So how does that fungus survive if it needs living tissue?
On the potato.
On which potatoes?
In the store, a seed potato.
In the storage, yeah, we got it.
Storage.
I was going to say a ton of potatoes, but we got lots of tons of potatoes in Idaho in storage, and that's living tissue, so that can survive on that living tissue in storage. So there's a lot of devious ways that these things can overwinter and survive. Okay, now, after this slide, you will never want to grow a garden again, but trust me, by the end of the lecture, we will get you to grow gardens again. Tomatoes attacked by 80 fungi, 11 bacteria, 16 viruses, and various nematodes and mycoplasms. Corn has 100 diseases, wheat has 80. Apple and potato each have 200 diseases. I can teach an entire plant pathology course using the potato as the host because it gets every single one of those biotic agents that cause disease. You can get viroids. We don't have too many viroid issues, but potatoes one of the crops that have a viroid issue. So, but even with all that, we can still grow good crops. I'm really proud of that potato. I just had to peel one potato, and I had mashed potatoes for my kids and me, and we had just one potato. It was great. Okay, size. This is a plant cell. Nematodes, some you can see with the naked eye, some you can't. This is a fungus. That's the green stuff on the bread and on your cheese. If you tease it apart and you use a jeweler's loop, or the scientific name is a bigger maker, but you know, something to magnify, you can actually see their threads, their little tiny threads. And each individual fungus, those fungal strands, they're called hyphae. They'll grow, and that's how they grow into the cheese and into your bread. Bread, and they'll grow along, and that's how they grow and do their thing. But you know, if you have a magnifying glass, you can see them. Bacteria, you can see them with a light microscope, but just barely. And then mycoplasms the same size, but they change shapes. The viruses, you need an electron scope to see them. Here's a hemoglobin molecule in comparison with the viruses. So that's a molecule right there. And those are viroids, so even smaller than molecules. Those viroids are extremely small, yet they cause a very serious disease we'll talk about. So that gives you a sense of the size that we're talking about when we're talking plant pathogens, the biotic agents. Okay, disease concepts. If you go to the doctor and you got a headache, what causes the headache? Well, what causes headaches? Anybody? Fevers? Teenagers?
Dehydration.
Pardon?
Dehydration.
Dehydration?
Yeah,
Tension? Yeah, blood vessels doing weird things. I mean, there's a lot of different things that cause a headache. So you go to the doctor and you say you've got a headache, and so you've got a symptom, and so he's going to start asking a lot of questions, right? That's a symptom. That's your body's reaction to an issue. Maybe it's a tumor in the brain even. You know, we have no clue what's causing that symptom. That's your body reacting. Same thing with plants. Plants have symptoms, and they also have signs. By the time I'm done, I've got to teach 3 of these classes tomorrow. And when I'm done tomorrow night, what's my throat going to look like? It's going to be all red and raw, right? Okay, that's my body's reaction to talking too much. But let's say I've been playing with my grandkids, say, and they gave me strep throat. And now I go to the doctor, and he says, well, let me look at your throat. And he looks in there, and he sees those little white pustules or those little red pustules. What is he seeing? What are those white pustules? That's the strep. That's the strep itself. That's the organism that's causing the disease. So that's actually the sign of the disease. So he's seeing what's causing it, and so he doesn't have to ask. Did you breathe in a lot of smoke? Were you in the forest fire? Or did you talk too much? Or is your sore throat caused by this or that, or allergic reaction? All those symptoms. He sees the sign, so the problem's all but solved. Well, you've got strep throat, and he gives me pills, and it takes care of it. Same thing with plants. They have signs and symptoms. Okay. So a sign of a disease is, you've got it there, the visible parts of the pathogen or its products seen on the host that can be used to identify the pathogen. Everybody's gone to the store and looked at the strawberries and found a carton that's got that gray mold growing on it, right? Well, that's the sign. That's the fungus itself. You know what's the problem. But if you find a strawberry that's got a sunken spot, what caused that sunken spot? That's a symptom. That's the strawberry reacting to something, and you don't know. That's a symptom. But if you got the sign, you're almost home free. You can figure out the problem pretty easy. So look for signs when you're looking for plant problems. But let me throw this out. You're getting too much all at once. But in our area, 80% of plant problems, give or take, are caused by the environmental issues. 20% are caused by these biotic agents. So when you first look at plant problems, think environmental causes first, okay? Because about 80% of our plant problems are environmentally triggered, okay? 20% are brought on by these biotic agents. But that being said, of course, I'm a pathologist, and I love looking for fungi and bacteria, and that's what I look at first, and I waste a lot of time looking for it, because 80% of the time I'm wrong. But if there are signs, you're home free. So keep that in mind when you're diagnosing problems in the background. So there's signs, and then there's symptoms, and that's, we've talked about it, visible reactions. I used to go to the grocery store and buy all the diseased vegetables and fruits I could find to teach these classes, and they started looking at me really strange at the checkout counter. But you go down the aisle and you see these red roots and onions. Anybody seen red roots and onions? That's actually the plant responding to a disease, and that red root is caused by, back when I went to school, it was a Pyrenacheta terrestris, and it turns the roots red, and that's how the plant responds to it. Here's probably a fungal disease causing issues on the plant. Here's another fungal disease in grass. But that's the plant's response to the disease, okay? So that's a symptom. Okay, that's some fungal spores. It sort of looks like a Christmas tree. I like that picture. But so is that a sign or a symptom? That's a sign. That's the organism. Is that a sign or a symptom? Okay, I hear symptom. I hear both. Okay. Okay, that big split, that split in the stem, is that a sign or a symptom? The split. Okay, that's a symptom. That's the plant's reacting to, we don't know what. Could be the wind, could be a dog stepped on it, or a deer stepped on it, something. But that white stuff, now, that, better look at that. If that is actually a fungus, then yeah, that's a sign. But in this case, it's not. But from the picture, you can't tell. But then how's this? Is that a sign or a symptom right here? Sign in this? Symptom, yeah. This could be wind abrasion, rubbing against another branch, insect damage. We don't know what caused that. But when you see when you see something growing on it, pretty sure that's a sign, and you're home free with it. Okay. And okay, we're going to touch on each of these organisms a bit. Fungi, there's a lot of them out there, about 8,000. That in North America, they cause about 80,000 different diseases. In comparison to the others, bacteria only about 200, viruses about 500, a little more, nematodes 1,000, and about 75 diseases caused by the phytoplasms. So when you're talking plant pathology, the vast majority are brought on by fungi. And how the fungi work, these hyphae, those little strands I'm talking about, they can produce enzymes. They can digest plant tissues. When they get inside the plant, they form structures called haustoria, and they just suck the juices out of the plant, and then they go through the plant and do their damage. They can also produce secondary metabolized chemicals that cause other symptoms, like verticillium wilt. The plant will wilt. That could be due to secondary metabolites and so forth. It uses several different methods to get into plants. the spore lands on a leaf and it grows sort of like a germ tube, and then it can form a structure like this, and then it pushes a penetration peg right through and just through mechanical pressure can get into the plant. Others, it'll grow and find a stomate or another natural opening or a wound, get into the plant that way. Others, they produce chemicals and they just eat their way into the plant, dissolve the tissue and get into the plant that way. So several different ways they get into plants. Okay, how many of us are here because of antibiotics? Okay, there's probably, I probably wouldn't be here. I was teaching a class 4 years ago and finally had to sit down, and I was too painful to stand and went to the hospital and my appendix had ruptured. So yeah, I'm glad for antibiotics. But very, very important, and the vast majority come from the fungi and actinomycetes and so forth. Some are edible, mushrooms and so forth. There's about 100,000 identified. Okay, we've talked about that. Okay, any questions on fungi? Really quick, brief view of fungi. Bacteria. Comes in various shapes and sizes. They reproduce very rapidly. Let's say this container is full of bacteria food, okay? And I've got one single bacterium, and I put it in there. And in a room with this temperature, it probably reproduces about every 20 minutes, but for the ease of the math, let's say it reproduces every half an hour. So I put one in there, and let's say it's 6:45. So 7:15, how many will we have in there? 2. Okay, and 7:45? 4. And in 24 hours? Lots. Okay, somebody said millions? More than millions. Anybody want to take another guess? Billions? More than billions. There's that many. It's 2 to the 24th if you want to do the math. But evidently I didn't do the math right. We have the INL site up there, and we had nuclear physicists that take this class, and they said they did the math, and they said my answer's wrong, but it's close. They said it was close. But anyway, the point is there's a lot of bacteria in 24 hours. And you say, well, that's a cool fact, but so what? Well, if something's going to grow that fast, what are the chances of a genetic hiccup? 241 trillion in 24 hours, the chances of a genetic, a stray X-ray from the sun or gamma radiation or whatever hitting that as it doing this division and so forth, there's a pretty good chance. Do we deal with resistant bacteria in the human world? Anybody heard of MRSA? The flesh-eating bacteria that, it's resistant to all known antibiotics. Yeah, we deal with that same type of issue in the plant world too. It's a serious problem, both with bacteria and fungi. We even have plants that are resistant to herbicides now. And we'll talk about the fire blight. Okay, who's reached into the potato sack and stuck their thumb into a rotten potato? Pretty much everybody, right? Well, that's a disease. And the texture, it's like yogurt, right? Why is it the same texture as yogurt? When you're eating yogurt, what are you eating? Bacteria, right. So it's the same, you get that same texture because it's a bacterial disease. Okay, any questions on bacteria before we go to viruses? Okay, we've mentioned they're small, and we can argue if they're alive or not. They're basically just a chemical. They differ in multiplication, symptomology. Viruses are a very diverse, very unique group. And again, they're just a chemical. They need a vector to move around. You need something to move around. Mostly insects do it, but a lot of other things do it also. Again, you need an electron scope to see them. Symptoms, they cause dwarfing and stunting mainly. They generally don't kill the plant outright, but it reduces yield and quality generally. The symptoms can be severe to none. There's a variety of, I have to talk potatoes being from Idaho, but there's a variety of potato called Shepity, and there's a potato virus called PVY, potato virus Y. And the Shepity plant can get this virus and can be 100% infected, and you don't know, you can't tell. There's no symptoms, it doesn't reduce the yield, it doesn't affect the plant at all. But that same virus, if you put it in rest of Burbank variety potatoes, you'll lose 60% of your yield. So even between varieties, these viruses can do really strange things. High and low temperatures can mask the symptoms. The potato seed growers, they get their money based on how much virus is in their crop. So they send crews out to rogue out the plants that have virus. And they have to send those roguing crews out in the morning because certain viruses only express symptoms in the morning. They have to send those crews out in the afternoon because certain other viruses only express symptoms in the afternoon. So the virus is really, really interesting. And that PBY and Shepherdie would be a latent virus. It's got it, but it shows no symptoms. Sort of like a carrier, if you will. Any questions on viruses? Okay, we'll talk viroids here. These are just RNA. There's no protein coat, and they're just so small. It just boggles my mind to think that there's enough genetic information there to code for a disease in plants. But if you remember your genetics from high school or college and those base pairs, there's millions and millions on a chromosome. There's only 250 to 370 bases on these viroids, extremely small. Yeah, they can cause some very, very serious diseases. No known human pathogen in this category that we know of yet, but this causes a very serious disease. I like the name of this disease. It's called Kadang Kadang. It's got rhythm to it. But there are certain islands in the South Pacific now that you cannot plant a coconut palm tree because of this disease. This piece of RNA that is that small kills the coconut palms. It's killing millions of coconut palms a year. Very, very serious problem. And again, it's RNA, and we're made up of DNA and RNA, right? That's how our cells divide and everything. That's why it's so hard to control these viral diseases we get. This is a virus, and it's hard to treat.